Aloha and welcome back to the Ohana Packers Edition podcast. Today we have our first opponent preview episode of the 2025 season. The Packers get set to open their season against the Detroit Lions in Lambeau Field. And Joe, we talked about it a little bit on our season preview episode. I don't want to say that this is a must win, but in terms of the ability to set the tone for the rest of the season, this game this game reigns pretty supreme because they haven't fared too well against the Lions the past three seasons, and it's time to stop losing to the better teams in the NFC if you're really going to be serious about contending. But how are you feeling going into Sunday's game?
I would argue that it is a must win just because what you mentioned. How long have the Packers, what's the losing streak against NFC North rivals? And it would really set the tone for the season if they can come out with a big win week one against a division foe. So I'm still unsure about it because, as we'll get into a little bit here in a bit, even with this just being week one, the injury report is like a mile long. I know they say some of them are just, ticky tacky that'll probably be with them throughout the season, but you still don't want to see that long list going into week one.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of shitty to hear that like these guys are going to deal with these injuries for the whole season, and we haven't even kicked the first game off. But as we usually do, recording this on Wednesday night, so the team has only had one official practice with a full practice report on it. So you've got 9 names that made the injury report today. Um, the lone full participant was Jordan Love, and the clips of practice we saw, he was going through the full reps. He was taking snaps from under center, doing all the throwing, looked to be going at full speed. So we'll speak on that a little bit later on. Limited participants, the international man of mystery, Zane Anderson, with a knee injury. Elton Jenkins returned after sitting out Monday's practice with a hip, what is now being listed as a hip, but he had the back issue earlier preseason, and now it's a hip that he's dealing with. Micah Parsons with the back, which has been under the full scrutiny of everyone this side of the sun. And Baron Sorrell, Dontavian Wicks, Savion Williams were all limited participants with a knee, calf, and hamstring, respectively. So good to have those guys back. Not so good news. Nate Hobbs out with his scoped knee, and Jaden Reed with his foot injury. Joe, let's start with the bad first. Different people have different feelings on how it is with Jaden and Ellis Hobbs. Or Nate Hobbs, not Ellis Hobbs. Ellis Hobbs was a Patriot. With Nate Hobbs, as far as Hobbs goes, I'm not very confident he's going to be able to play this Sunday just because he's not a returning player. The scheme is new to him. He hasn't been able to. I know they showed him doing individual drills, like kind of mirroring what the guys in front of him were doing and stuff, but he hasn't fully worked out since he got the knee scope at the beginning of preseason. So it's been a couple months that I know that they can do some water activities and all that kind of stuff, but it's his knee. So how much he's able to ramp up is pretty limited, in my opinion. And with Jaden, I feel with Jaden, it's such a black hole of mystery. I know that he kind of intimated that it was a planned day off for him and stuff, but um on one hand, I have my doubts that it's as bad as they say it is because I just can't see a team that's as conservative the Packers have been with injuries, letting him play with this kind of Jones fracture in his foot. And at the same time, this is a guy that thrives off of his explosiveness, his ability to use his speed to get open deep, and his agility to get open on routes. And if he's at all hobbled or compromised, like we all remember what it looked like when Randall Cobb would try to be out there on a bad wheel, and it was like he's just kind of taking up space out there. So, of the two, which one do you think has a more realistic chance of playing come Sunday?
I would say Hobbs just because they claimed that after the scope that he would be ready week one. So I would put it more on that. I wish we could find out more about what's going on with the Jaden Reed stuff, because you got one side claiming it's a Jones fracture, then you got, all this other speculation going on with it. So with not knowing what his whole situation is, because I was just doing a quick read over what a Jones fracture actually is, and it's the break in the fifth metatarsal of the foot, and it it doesn't sound like something you're going to be able to play fully with,
You think
because
about running routes as a receiver, you're pushing off your foot, and when you go to do any kind of breaking route, basically whenever he's cutting anything to his left because you're pushing off your, well, I'm not sure which foot it is, but if it's his left foot, any routes breaking to his right, and if it's his right foot, any routes breaking to his left, he's just not going to have any explosiveness off that foot. And that's, forget cutting. Like, I don't know what he's going to look like if he tries to run. I know we've seen some clips of him jogging around the practice field and stuff like that, but that's light action, half speed, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't bode well.
but even if he's just jogging, just what I'm reading from, what a quick Google search has given me, even just kind of jogging, and if he's not having any issues with that, I don't know how that could be a Jones fracture unless they've got
Right.
it so shot up with drugs that he just can't feel the foot or something. But because it's common symptoms are pain on the outside of the foot, possible bruising in affected area, difficulty walking or bearing weight on the foot. So if he's able to bear some kind of weight on it and not have issues, then, you know, is it a Jones fracture, or is it just, I don't know, did he severely stub his toe? You know, something along. I'm not trying to joke about the situation. It's just we're so in the dark with his injury that, and like you said, with the way the Packers are conservative with their medical stuff, I just don't see them playing him through Jones fracture. Specifically when, and like I said, this is just a quick Google search saying that best treatment for it is immobilization for at least 6 weeks, or surgery if it doesn't heal properly. Well, it's not like a hand injury where you can throw a cast on it and go out there and play a little bit. You can't run around in a cast. I don't care how good you are. You'd be Usain Bolt and have a cast on your foot and still not run as well as you'd hope to. So to go back to your original question, I would have to say Hobbs is probably a little bit more there, just because, like I said, that was everything that we kept hearing was going to hold him out for the whole preseason, and he should be good to go for week one. And this could just be resting up, and we don't know what they do outside of the media portion of practice. This could, for all we know, this could just be head games against the Lions. Hold him out of the media portion so we have no clue, if what he's doing or anything like that. And then when they get into the non-media portions, then he's participating as best as he can.
Yeah. So, like we always say, we are always making our talking points for this episode off of one day of practice, unless it's one of the short weeks. So, things are literally changing by the time you're listening to this episode. But, it's not the best feeling for either of those two. And those are two pretty important players. I don't want to say Reed's any less important, but, Hobbs was expected to be your starting corner, your potential nickel when they rotate in if they wanted to go with three corners, or he'd stay on the perimeter and you bring Bullard in and play a nickel spot. And, you know, they're okay at both spots because, at least at corner, you can turn to Valentine and Nixon to be your starters, and you at least have the option of throwing Bullard in the slot or doing something, or it won't be necessarily a nickel, but you can throw Hopper out there to cover a tight end or something like that, or you can use like Oladapo or whatever. They have options there. And then as far as as Reed slot or anything like that, you know, it's really good that Wicks is back. Dobbs is not on the injury report, and then obviously Golden's not in the injury report. Plus Musgrave, Kraft. This could be a game where they go a little bigger in terms of personnel groupings. You see more 12 with two tight ends out there. Try to reintegrate Musgrave into the flow of the offense, or more 21 so you can get Brooks and Jacobs or Brooks and Wilson out there. So they're good if these are the only injuries they're dealing with. It gets a little dicier if they suffer another injury. So keep your ear to the ground on that one. As far as the limited participants, Sorrell might get some action if he's healthy enough to go. Savion, I kind of wonder if he's just put on the shelf for another week just because he did miss so much of preseason and he's a rookie.
And
Whereas
that's
Sorrell,
possible. I mean, it's a good sign for him that he actually
yeah,
returned.
yeah, it's just good that he's back on the practice field and that it is consecutive days for him because he was back on Monday. So regardless, it's good that he's made it through a couple days. And then with Love, or I guess we'll go to Jenkins. Some people are saying like, is this part of a potential like soft holdout? I don't think you would do that at this point of the season. I think that Jenkins' best way to prove that he deserves another deal is to play and play well. So I do think this is just a function of he is an old now, you know, and he's had a major injury with the ACL in 2021. He's dealt with some minor nagging issues the past couple years. So I think this is just, he's kind of on that Bulaga later career trajectory where it's like they're going to kind of give him lighter loads during the practice week and stuff. He is the elder statesman of the O-line room. It's good that Aaron Banks is not on the injury report at all after, he's been dealing with a back issue all preseason. So it's good to see him not listed here. And then, the big one that everyone wants to know about is Jordan Love. And the good thing there is that he was a full participant today. And okay, so my whole thing with Jordan's injury, I don't think it's going to affect it. Some people were questioning if it's going to affect his ability to take under center snaps. It's his left thumb. So when you're right-handed, whichever handed quarterback you are, your throwing hand is the top hand, the hand that's against the center's butt. And that's the hand that the ball is hitting. If you are having problems with the fingers on your non-throwing hand, you're doing something wrong, or your center's arms are just so long that he's over snapping the ball, which is really hard to do, especially because they're trying to snap and get up to block as quick as they can. So I never was concerned that it would be an issue for him to get under center. I didn't see clips of how he was handing the ball off today. Last week, he was only doing handoffs with his right hand, no matter whether the running back was going right or left. So that is something to watch. Kind of looks like he's backhanding the ball in when if the back is going to the offense is right. Normally, you would turn around and hand the ball off with your left hand because your quarterback is back is to the line of scrimmage. So whichever way the back is going, it's the opposite hand. But so last week, and he runs to the right, he was still kind of backhanding it with his right hand. We'll see how he goes into the game on Sunday. But the main thing is that he's been practicing it either way. So if it's any kind of issue, he's got the ability to go with, throwing hand only. So good to see them working on that side of it. On the Lions side of things, it's a bunch of guys that I would be surprised if many Packers fans knew the names of, other than Isaac Tesla, who is a limited participant dealing with an illness. Otherwise, it's a bunch of backups who weren't likely to be starting or playing many snaps. So the Lions are coming in with a slightly better bill of health than the Packers. And that sets the table from an injury standpoint for us.
I have a feeling most of these guys are going to go just because this is like holdover from preseason with a lot of the injuries. Elton's is a little bit weird because didn't his start out as like a back injury?
Yeah, like week one of the preseason. And, people were speculating like, oh, is he holding out? And no, he's just doing some, he was rehabbing his back and stuff. So
And Jordan, like we talked about in the preseason, there's no doubts that he's going to play because it's his non-throwing hand. He'll probably have a glove on it for a couple weeks, but I don't see any issues unless it gets unless he hits it off a helmet again, because not that surgeries are ever minor. You know, when you're cutting into the body, it always does weird things, but uh, it was a super minor ligament damage. It wasn't like it was a broken bone. It wasn't like he had to have pins put in it and immobilized and all that stuff. So, you know, it his I'm not so worried about. Sorrell, I could see it like you were just mentioning with Williams, Savion, that, you know, maybe they just hold him out for, especially now that Micah Parsons is in there in the mix. I could see them just holding those guys out. The other one that's kind of a worrisome in a way is Wicks, just because he missed all of preseason. He's still limited going into the first week of the season. You know, can't afford to not be out there because, like I said before, I don't see him as a lock on this team. I could see him having another one or two games where it's just constant drop after drop after drop, and they do something with him, whether it's a trade for a lower pick or just a flat out cut. But he's the one that out of all of them that I have the most concern about, just because we know what he can be, and we also know what one of his issues is. And if he's not practicing and he's not playing, then he can't work on those issues.
Yeah, and I agree. They see the talent and they want to give it every chance that it works out. But like you said, Golden's drafting, the Parsons signing, those are all things that shorten his window for having chances as the Packers championship window opens up. They don't have time to be, for all intents and purposes babying guys. Action needs to happen, kind of thing. So, we'll see. But looks like the Packers are, it's like you said, it's a long list, but they are, despite it, relatively healthy going into this game. The big notes for this matchup, the Packers obviously have made the addition of Micah Parsons changes from where this team was a month ago. The Lions are in for some wholesale changes where they have replaced both coordinators. They've lost two of their starting O linemen. And, on defense, the question is, what's their pass rush look like with Aiden Hutchinson on a surgically repaired leg and question mark? So what is your key matchup that you're looking at heading into this game, Joe?
I think it's going to be the run defense. So if you want to just make it the Packers defensive line versus the Lions offensive line, just because you did lose Kenny Clark, however you want to look at it, whether it's a big loss, minor loss, whatever. But you did lose Kenny Clark, and now you have a bunch of guys that you're not sure of when it comes to stopping the run. We know what Devontae Wyatt is. He's more of a pass rusher, but this puts pressure on him to become a hybrid where both a run defender and a pass rusher. Same with Carl Brooks. Same with Kobe Wooden. It's going to put a lot of pressure on Brinson and Stackhouse if they're active, because we won't know if they're active until, what is it, an hour and a half before game time or something like that. So, yeah, my answer has got to be what matchup is going to be the run defense versus the run offense.
Yeah, that's one of my X factors for the game too. Is like Detroit's one of their building blocks has been the physicality of their offensive line, and they lost two of the ringleaders in that group. Their center, whose name is escaping me right now.
Ragnow?
Yes, thank you, Frank Ragnow. He was one of the tone setters for them. I know that everyone talks about Penei Sewell, but Ragnow was literally the pivot and the anchor point for that O line. He was one of the tone setters, and Kevin Zeitler left to sign a free agent deal with Tennessee or something like that. So it's going to be some big changes for Detroit heading into this season. and it remains to be seen how that all fleshes out. And I know, like you said, I know losing Kenny, maybe more symbolic blow more than what he was giving them, physically on the field. But at the same time, that's an experienced player that you have to replace, and it's on guys like you said, like all the ones you named, Wooden, who is stepping into the starter's role, Brinson, Stackhouse, but also Wyatt. We're in year 4, and Wyatt is still not a much improved run defender over what he was coming into the league. And that was always his biggest weak point, was his ability to anchor versus the run, especially in this scheme where he's not being asked to take on double teams. He's being asked to be like a defense, a line of scrimmage penetrator, and he just cannot get washed by single blockers anymore. We know what he can do as a pass rusher. We saw the leap from him last season. I do think it was legitimate. And at the same time, he they're not going to trust him to stay on the field if he can't hold up against the run. And whether that's turning to Carl Brooks or if it's putting both the Georgia boys out there to start the game, whatever it is, if Wyatt can't figure it out, that really puts a damper on what the Packers are able to do defensively. And circling back to the Lions losing 2 linemen, you don't want to see this interior defense get its lunch handed to them by the Lions, who are, replacing them with what I think are lesser players. So, gotta see better play from the interior defense there. And I think offensively, it's sort of a similar thing where win the line of scrimmage, for the most part, the Packers O line, I know that Jenkins has shuffled over and Banks is in at left guard, but sort of the idea is to add some beef up front, and you want to see that pay off for the Packers going into this week. I know that obviously, Jordan's healthy and we're going to want to see him take a leap as a starting quarterback, but at the same time, especially early in the season, to help like ease the offense into the season and all that kind of stuff, that LaFleur is going to be able to want to lean on his run game. And in order to do that, this, slightly shuffled O-line is going to need to pull its weight. And, the Lions are going to be without Ali McNeil, who might have been their best interior defensive lineman. He's still recovering from an ACL tear. We, like I said on the preview episode, I expect Hutchinson to be as much of himself as as possible. But this is a major injury he's coming back from, and you just don't know how guys come back. Sometimes guys come back and they're just totally fine, and other times you get a Derek Sherrod situation where that guy just can't move like he used to before because the injury was that severe. So the Packers have to test it early, and they, on either side of the ball, they need to own the line of scrimmage. That's how they're going to flip this matchup and be back to, dominating the Lions like they did for the better part of our fandom of the Packers.
For sure. And, another matchup is going to be key is, obviously you kind of mentioned it with the Hobbs injury and that, but, how's the secondary going to hold up against Amon Ra and Jamison Williams, and my mind is blanking on the other ones that they have on the team. I know they just traded Tim Patrick last week, but when Laporta at tight end and stuff like that. So, that's another matchup is how is this defensive back, how are the group of defensive backs going to hold up against that kind of thing? And what you're going to get with Jared Goff. He's going to throw it as much as he can. And, I won't say that he's an elite quarterback, but he's definitely not a bottom of the rung type quarterback either. So, it is what it is. But like I said, that's going to be another matchup.
And then one area that, I'm really excited to see what this receiving group is able to do. And when I say receiving group, I want to see Golden get out there against, what is still I know that everyone talks about Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, but I don't think this cornerback room for the Lions is special. The Bama kid that we all wanted, he hasn't progressed like everyone expected him to. Rakestraw is out for the season. As much as I want to see the Packers out physical the Lions, if Love and this receiving group can get it going tomorrow or on Sunday, I'm all here for it. Forget style points, forget all of that stuff. Just get this win. It's week one. Like you said, set the tone for this season. Don't get off to a bitter. This is. It always blows my mind whenever they're like, "This is LaFleur's first home season opener." That really just boggles the mind when you think about it. In that fact that this is his seventh season in Green Bay and he's never coached. Week one has never been home opener for him, and I believe he's undefeated in them. So knock on wood, but I do want to see how he has this group ready to go coming out. And that's kind of been something that we've been able to dog him for a little bit in his first few years, is that this team hasn't gotten off to the fastest of starts every season. So we've seen LaFleur try to make adjustments to hopefully jumpstart his team, mainly his offense going into the season. And I'm excited to see if he can make it happen. Anything that you're excited for, or anywhere you think we have a mismatch against the Lions?
No, I was just looking at their depth chart, and yeah, outside of their two starting safeties, I'm not really sold on their defensive backs. Terry and Arnold is one starter, DJ Reed is the other, Amik Robertson is their nickel, and then behind that you got Khalil Dorsey, Rocky Sin, and Avante Maddox. So I know Rocky Sin was, what was he? He was a
Cup of
second
tea with the
rounder.
Packers. Yeah, with the Colts, I think.
Yeah, and then bounced all for the longest time a little bit with the Packers, but I I mean, outside of their starting safeties, this what's going to help the Lions is if they can get pressure. But like you said, with the Packers going with the beefy boys up front, are they going to be able to hold up against that? Which goes back to another thing, like I said, offensive line versus defensive line. Where I was talking more Packers defensive line, the same thing can be said about the Packers offensive line against the Lions defensive line. So it's it's definitely not a matchup you want to see in week one. This is more of a matchup you want to see week 5, week 6, or something like that. Teams settled. It's not like college football where you can pick a
Directional state university.
yeah, and play unless you're Iowa going against the University of Albany and being down 7-3. Yeah, early on, but so it is what it is. It's kind of the luck of the draw when it comes to the schedule. It also makes you wonder if there's been a lot of things the last couple of weeks that makes me wonder if what they say about the NFL being scripted has some merit to it. Because think about it, there were rumors about Micah Parsons to Green Bay all through the offseason. And then all of a sudden it happens. And then the schedule. Well, why would you want the Lions against the Packers in week one? Well, because you're going to show off your new toy in Micah Parsons against a division rival. I mean, that's storylines you want to have. And, it's hard to do naturally. You can only do a lot of those storylines when they're concocted. But that's a whole nother discussion for a whole nother show.
Yep. So, I don't like to use the previous season's stats, especially because with the Lions case, 2 new coordinators, a bunch of coaches out the door, different personnel, guys are injured. That's one of the funnier ones too. Is not only is Aiden Hutchinson coming back from injury, the starting end opposite him is an old friend of sorts for the Packers, Marcus Davenport. He who once was the Packers allowed the trade up that got them as extra first round pick in 2018, and they subsequently got Jair with the Saints original pick. So, but Davenport's a guy who's played like 2 games in the last 2 seasons or something like that. So we haven't seen much of him in a couple seasons. Yeah, like I do expect the Lions to be, well coached. They're going to play hard. They're going to be aggressive. As much as losing Johnson hurts and losing Aaron Glenn's hurts, in the like game planning regard, Dan Campbell is still going to have his team with that, knee cap biting attitude and all that kind of stuff. But it'll be interesting to see from a X's and O's standpoint how differently they operate. And some of the stuff Packers had so many guys that everyone was like, oh my God, what's wrong with Rashawn Gary? What's wrong with Quay Walker? Guys adjust to new schemes at different rates. And it'll be interesting to see if the Lions have any issues with that. The one thing you do worry about a little, not worry, but their new offensive coordinator did make a comment that like the Lions did do a lot of good stuff. Johnson was really he had a lot of ingenuity and creativity, but their new coordinator did kind of say that his intent was to sort of bring it back to more of a meat and potatoes pound the rock offense. So we'll see how that equates to the on-field product for the Lions. And like I said, at the end of the day, this game comes down to the simple question of can Green Bay win the line of scrimmage? And they've been working on changing that arithmetic for the last couple years, and we'll see how that comes out. The best case scenario I can see for the Packers is that they're able to, get and sustain a 2-score lead, whether, it's like 10-14 or more, hopefully more. So that way you're able to like sprinkle in some Micah Parsons. You don't have to overuse him. You can use him on just some strict passing down situations. And then, in the fourth quarter when you're up like 10 and Detroit's trying to put together, a last ditch like panic drive to get the game within one score, you're like, okay, Micah, go get your conditioning in, go chase after Jared Goff kind of thing. I think that would be the best case scenario for the Packers. You don't want one of those like knockdown, slobber knocker, back and forth kind of games where it's like he's got to come in for what you think is a passing down, but may have to play some run and all that kind of stuff. So, hoping that for once the Packers will be the team taking, getting the jump on their opponent. You got any? Oh, go for it.
Well, I was just sitting here looking at the coaching staff for the Lions, and I mean, there's some really, names that we would have saw when we were younger. Mark Brunell is their quarterbacks coach. Tashard Choice was a running back for the longest time in the NFL. Bruce Gradkowski is an offensive assistant. He was a quarterback for the Steelers for a while. David Shaw was a head coach of Stanford for years. Marquez Tuisosopo played for the Raiders for a bit, I believe. Kelvin Shepard was a linebacker in the league.
And then Fraley.
Yeah. Then the one that I find amazing, and most people might not know this name, but I do just from my time being up there and because my good friend knew these guys by name, but one of the assistant strength and conditioning coaches for Lions is Thaddeus Jackson, and he was strength and conditioning for the Green Bay Packers for years. So it's just amazing the staff that they have over there.
The sitcom fan in me just laughs that they have a Costanza on staff. No judge. I have no idea. Jill, she may be one of the best coaches ever, but it is just hilarious that an NFL team would have a Costanza.
Yeah, but it's just crazy seeing all that. But really, yeah, I do have some over-unders that we'll go through, and I'll try to keep better track of it.
Yeah, I was going to say, hold on. Let me open up the Google Drive, and we will try to do a much better job of keeping track of these than we ever have in the past. So hold that thought for just 1 second, my friend.
I have 4 of them, so just so you have space over there for it.
All righty.
All right, my first is going to be an obvious one. I did listen to Lombardi's Bar earlier, and I'm going to set it off of what Dan set his. Although I should set it a little bit higher because I think this is really limited, but Micah Parsons over under 20.5 snaps.
All right. Micah Parsons, 20.5 snaps. I'm going. I'm going over barely.
See, that's what I was thinking too. I'm thinking that he's going to get about 25, depending on how the game's
Yeah.
going. If they get down early, I can see him playing more, just to see if he can wreck the game and get turnovers. But
I was
if
thinking
they
of it. I was thinking of it the other way because if we're up, Detroit has to pass, and then therefore, like, don't worry about him having to take on the run as much, kind of thing. But I do see the bonus of where you're coming from too, where it's like just throw the monkey wrench out there for Detroit and see what you get, kind of thing. Yeah, like, and so there you figure there's 60 to 70 snaps per team for a whole game, so that's like 15 a quarter. So 25 snaps is he's like playing like 1 2/3 quarters worth of snaps, kind of thing, which when you like string it out to a whole game, or even if you just look at it, the average team gets like 9 offensive possessions. So if he plays like, and every drive is not a 3 and out. But even if every drive were a 3 and out, that would be 9 snaps if you only played like situational pass rusher. So you've got 1/3 down for every drive. Some drive's going to be an 8 play drive, 10 play drive kind of thing. So you do the math out, and it's like, oh, you do get to like 20 snaps pretty quick, actually.
Yeah, and my thoughts more of it is, and I get where you're coming from, that Detroit would have to pass more if they're down a little bit. But I also see them having to run a lot of hurry up. And I don't know if the Packers want to have Micah out there during some of the hurry up. But if they get down early, then they're going to, like you said, throw the monkey wrench out there and just they're going to hope for the turnovers that the disruption that he's going to cause more than anything. So I I get where Dan was coming from, because he kind of did the math like you did, where 20 snaps is about average. But I just think he'll hit that 25 mark, just because it's week one at Green Bay. He's going to get a huge ovation when he gets introduced. He's going to want to show the Packers fans what he's going to bring. And so my next one is also on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going over under half a sack for Rashawn Gary.
I'm going. I'm going under, only because Rashawn's my. But Parsons isn't going to play the whole game, and because he won't, Rashawn is going to be the guy that Detroit keys on. And I think if anyone's going to get a sack, it's going to be like one of Quay or Cooper getting in there on a blitz, or I think it's going to be your dude Lucas, who's going to be like, if Rashawn or if Micah is target one for the Lions, Lucas with his revamped, and everybody, even Kenny on his way out the door, has been singing praises of Lucas. We've seen it. Some people were kind of poo-pooing the preseason game, but I'm like, none of those teams when he played meaningful snaps were throwing anything of like a legitimate passing offense against him. It was all quick 3-step drop kind of shit. And I mean, unless Lucas just runs through, like literally runs through a guy, he's not gonna win on a 3-step drop if it's executed properly. That's just not the kind of rusher he is. So I thought I could see the improvement. I honestly thought he was improving as last season went down the stretch. And like I said, one of the things that I lamented and questioned was why he wasn't starting the second, after Preston was traded. I thought that was a big missed opportunity. But yeah, I'm going under on Rashawn getting that half a sack.
I'm going to say he gets the full sack. And this is the scenario that I've been thinking it out of, is that it's going to be early, whether it's first possession, it'll be the first Dallas possession of the offensive side of the ball. I can see throw Mike out there for the first time. They're going to throw Rashawn out there for the alongside Micah for the first time. They're going to have Devontae out there. They're going to have probably Kobe Wooden, and it's just going to be a pure rush down. And I could just see him, they're going to try to double Micah, obviously, and I can just see him getting, hopefully with Covington in there, he's taught him how to not worry about the speed and go more with a bull rush style plan. But that's how I see it going down.
And he has had success against Taylor Decker. Like when Rashawn has had it going against Detroit, he has taken Decker's lunch money in a bunch of their matchups. You had the big Thanksgiving game in 2023. He had a couple nice sacks against him or he had definitely one where he just did the thing where he hugs around him after he pushes him into Goff. And then I think back in 22, he had one before he had a couple QB hits before he got injured. So yeah, like I said, I'm just playing the Parsons isn't going to play a lot, and therefore Rashawn's going to get doubled and stuff. But like you said, his shots are going to be on those plays where Parsons is on the field, or he just might have one of those games where it's like, fuck it. That's the part too that as much as everyone's talking about how much Parsons will help, will definitely, it's going to be a symbiotic relationship between the two and Lucas with Parsons on the field and stuff. It also is just going to motivate those guys, the incumbent players, because it's you guys were singing us a bunch of praises, but you still went out and made a sensible, a move anyone would make, but shit, I still matter kind of thing. So yeah, those guys are still motivated on their own as well.
They are. But I just, like I said, we're going to have that first game vibe, and it's not going to look pretty, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on it where it's the first time they've played in Green Bay for week one and, in the whole LaFleur era, I believe. So that's at least 7 years. So there's going to be an aura around it that something's got to get done. All right. So now I got my two offensive side. My first one is Love touchdowns 2.5.
Passes or just touchdowns in general?
I just use touchdowns in general.
I'm going over. All passing.
I think I'm going to go under.
Jacobs.
Yeah, there's going to be the whole Jacobs factor. There's going to, of course, they're going to throw out some of the, the jet sweeps or whatever. So unless it's one of them pop passes that look like a jet sweep, but it, whatever. I think there's going to be other way. And then there's always a chance that the defense will score points too. So I don't think it's going to be too far under. I think it's going to be right at 2 touchdowns. But yeah. And then the last one I got is Josh Jacobs over under 50.5 yards.
Rushing or?
Rushing.
I'm going over because I have Packers winning.
I'm going to say over, but it's not going to be by much, just because I think they're going to try to be more of a balanced. I don't think they want to put too much on him to start. They're going to throw Wilson out there. They're going to throw Brooks out there.
Yeah. I think people have to remember that Brooks wasn't really integrated to this roster until week 6 of last year, basically. And then they, like you said, they know they can turn to Jacobs, but that was really out of necessity to start last season because of Jordan's injury, such. And so, yeah, I agree that, they're going to want him. I don't think he's going to get 20 carries this game unless Detroit is absolutely just hemorrhaging yards. I think they're going to try keep him in that 15 to 18 carry range. And, like I said, if the game goes where Green Bay just takes a 3 touchdown lead at some point, then they're just going to lean on Detroit's defense kind of thing. But I'd agree that this is one of those, like, the old, like, the 2004, where it was like, get Amon like 18 carries, get Najee like a dozen thing, and you get your 30 rushing attempts that way, kind of thing. So yeah, I agree. Like, I have him in like the 75-yard range, but that's because he's gonna bust like a 15-yard run at some point, kind of thing. So yeah, it'll be like a, one of those like 75-yard, averaging 4.2 and like a couple touchdowns kind of game. Because, like I said, I want us to win.
Well, here's a fun one for you. Over under souls that Josh Jacobs is going to take this game.
Ooh, I've got under, just because we'll just put it at a half a soul. Just because I don't think Detroit is that team that gets its soul taken, at least so far.
I don't know. I have this feeling that Josh is going to reap Brian Branch. There's this gut feeling that, because, that's the one that they always seem, well, I mean, Kirby Joseph is always the playmaker, but Branch is always the hothead when it seems to go against the Packers. So I could just see him trying to come in on something and Jacobs just plants him.
I can see it too. All right, we've been at this we've been at this for like 50 minutes now. Any final thoughts you got for it, or you want to just put the final touches on this one and
I
get it
really
back
don't
on?
have anything. I mean, obviously, it's going to be nice having football played, meaningful football. I got to get a hold of Brian, because I think at one time he talked about wanting to do a post-game show. So maybe look forward to that, probably a half hour, 45 minutes after the end of the game. But other than that, I can't think of anything else.
Sounds good.
Oh, yeah, I do have something else. I was watching a clip about, it was from ESPN, and they were, I don't know what show it was on, but they called the guy Mad Dog. And I don't
Oh,
know.
Chris Russo.
And he said there are 10 quarterbacks in the NFL that he would take over Jordan Love. Now, he got to
This guy, yeah.
yeah, something like
Yeah.
that. And he got to 8 before everybody kind of like interrupted him and said, "You're stupid." And I kind of agree with everybody else. I mean, I'm not saying Jordan Love is a top 5 quarterback. He just hasn't shown completely
The
everything there.
consistency. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But a couple of names he put on there over Jordan Love. He put Justin Herbert over Jordan Love. He put Matthew Stafford over Jordan Love.
Who can't even walk onto the field right now.
And he put Jared Goff over Jordan Love. Now, Stafford, I will give you that. He's got a Super Bowl ring. He's got a long history of successful stats and stuff like that. He played for the Lions. He was never going to have success with the Lions. But like you said, he's having injuries right now. He's up there in age. I don't know if I'd take him at the moment. But I give you that one. I give you that one. But Jared Goff and Justin Herbert, I didn't watch to see if he justified it, but Jared Goff and Justin Herbert, what success has Justin Herbert had in the league? What success has Jared Goff had? He went to the Super Bowl with the Rams, but they didn't win it.
Partly because of him.
They all have the same. Well, no, I take that back. Do they have the same record in the playoffs? Or does Jordan Love have one up over them in the playoffs?
So no, Herbert is 0-2. Love is, and then Goff, it's fuck, because Goff went to the Super Bowl and lost. So that season he was like 2-1, and then I think he's been like 0 because.
Well, let's put it this way: since he's been with Detroit, they haven't won a playoff game, have they?
No, they have, because they made the
Okay.
NFC Championship game in 2023.
Okay, so he's got one. Jordan's got one.
Yeah, yeah, because they blew it last year, and then year before they lost to Dallas one year. Then shit, yeah, something like that. Yeah,
But I mean, just to sit there and I was dumbfounded. I don't like to agree with the guy because I'm not a real big fan of ESPN stuff, but even Stephen A. Smith was saying the same crap. Like, you're gonna take these guys over Jordan Love?
and like I will put Herbert in kind of the same position as Love, where like you gotta see it in the postseason, and Love does have one win, whereas Herbert doesn't. But like at least with Herbert, Jordan and him are kind of in that conversation where it's like you've seen them play like a true top 2 or 3 quarterback in the league. Like you've seen them get hot, and like it is legitimately their play that has them playing really well, kind of thing. With Goff, it's always been, well, it's Sean McVay's system. Well, it's Ben Johnson like setting everything up for him, kind of thing and stuff. Like that's the part where kind of like, yeah, it's cool that like you have a guy who can hit the throws when they're set up for him, but it's like I don't want to say that like Love is like some otherworldly thing or anything, but we've seen him play quote unquote unconsciously. And that was the stretch run to get him in the playoffs in 2023. And on one leg last year, he still had flashes where you're like, yeah, that's the guy that they gave the extension to and stuff like that. So I agree. Like he's not there yet where he's like a stone cold lock to be a top 5 quarterback in the league. And like there legitimately are 5 guys. Like it's pretty easy. Um, you got Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and then like you can, whether you want to say Jalen Hurts is, but whatever. But like that's 4 already. And so you only got like one spot for him to get into the top 5. At his best, he definitely deserves to be in that conversation. We're going to find out this year how much it was, as you and I believe, the injury really hampered him last season, or if it's like he's just going to be an inconsistent guy that, depending on which way you roll the dice, you're going to get an average guy or you're going to get a top 5 contending quarterback. So I think he's much closer to the latter, but that's why they play the games. We're going to find out what Jordan's made of this year.
And he's got a lot less experience starting as the other guys do.
Yep.
So, whatever. Just that really threw me off because it's like, even as a homer understands he's not a top 5 or a top 3 quarterback. And there could possibly be 10 guys over Jordan right now. But Jared Goff and friggin' Justin Herbert?
Robert Mays put it the best. One of the best that I've heard from an outsider's perspective. He's a Bears fan. And the way he said it is like, he's like, right now, he would say he's like the 7th or 8th best quarterback in the NFL, but he's like, where he wants to see better, and he does really like Jordan. He said what he thinks would take Jordan higher is if he just played the 7th best quarterback every week. He has moments where he has multiple game stretches where he's top 3, top 5. He's in that. But then he has some moments where you're just like, oh, Jordan, like the interception he threw in Chicago where that thing was just airmailed by 3 feet kind of thing. Or, the 2 pick sixes he threw where he's just trying to make something happen as he's getting sacked and, against the Rams and the Lions and Lambeau, where like, you just can't make that play, but I understand what you're trying to do. And it's like, it's that whole like he's metronoming out to the 8th best quarterback, but if he can bring this bottom part up, it's like then you're like 7th, 6th, 5th. And that's the thing too, is like people are like, oh my god, he's not top 5, but I'm like, the names that I listed, like those are pretty much MVP candidate locks kind of thing. And like I believe Love will get there, but he's not quite there yet because of, like you said, inconsistency, injury last year. This is only his 3rd year as a starter. Those guys have all been starting since like Lamar 2018, he's been a starter basically. Burrow's been starting. I know he blew his knee out, but he's been starting since he was a rookie. What's it called? Josh Allen's been starting since he was a rookie in 2018, and yeah, so like, and Mahomes has been starting since 2018. So yeah, those guys all have 5 more years ish of starting on him. So of course they should be more seasoned than him. They literally are more seasoned than him. So yeah, I think a lot of this like poo pooing Jordan's play is literally coming out because the Packers traded for Parsons, and now it's like it's the Dallas people saying like, "Oh, Parsons wasn't that important," and all the other media are like, "Oh well, Jordan Love's still your quarterback, and he's not that good." So it's like, you know, and hey, from a Green Bay point of view, no one's handing you the Lombardi yet. Like, they don't do that. We tease the Bears every time for winning the offseason. It really fucking does feel good to win the offseason. You, you draft a receiver for the first time in Matthew Golden's lifetime, and you go out and acquire a defensive player of the year, maybe league MVP caliber player who's possibly hasn't hit his athletic prime yet. And yeah, like of course the haters are gonna come out of the woodworks because they're like, well, something's gotta be imperfect about that team because no one wants to admit that, Green Bay shouldn't be in the upper echelon, but they were like, fuck it, we're doing whatever we have to get in there. And people don't like it when a team that quote unquote doesn't deserve to be in an echelon gets to an echelon due to whatever talent acquisition. So it is what it is. And that's where it circles back to why this game is so important. You go out, you kick Detroit in the teeth, you win this game, especially if you manage to win it by 10 or more points. That sends a message that, like, hey, this team is different. Like, yeah, they made the playoffs the last 2 years, but they really backed in or, like, snuck in the back door kind of thing. You beat Detroit, that just changes the tone around this team. People go, oh shit, maybe they are for real. So hence that's the importance of this game. Joe, you got any last thoughts before we put a bow on this one? All right.
No, that's it. I just had to bring that up because I just saw the clip today and I was like, no way.
Yep.
No.
Yeah, they're putting out that kind of crap. They're putting commercials into Red Zone. We'll talk about that more on Sunday. But hey, for Iowa Joe, I'm Mike. Check us out. Check out ohanapackers.org. Carlos is putting out a lot more stories. I'm going to get back into writing because the season's back around. Check out the merch. Check out Cheese Talk Radio. Excuse me. Follow us on our social medias. The Packers, let's get this thing rolling. Iowa Joe and I, there's only so much we can say because the story is not written for the Packers. As much as Joe joked earlier that maybe the season is scripted just a little bit, it's time for the Packers to write the conclusion to their own story, and it's all right in front of them. But until we record on Sunday after the game, for Iowa Joe, I'm Mike Kawano. Go Pack Go, and aloha.